Alan White, how are you doing, man? Welcome.
I'm well. How are you, Carlos?
All good here, man. All good. Like in preparing to this conversation, I was listening to as much as possible about the DAO law that's coming into effect in Wyoming, that has come into effect in Wyoming.
Yes.
A couple of weeks from today, since you guys are probably listening to this 2 weeks after we have this conversation. So yeah, well, I wanted to cover that with you. I wanted to cover other topics of relevance since you're American, you're also in research, you're very well in the know in this aspect. So would you like to talk a bit about yourself for those that don't know you?
Certainly. Thank you, Carlos. Well, I'm Alan White, obviously. I started actually my career in finance and hated that world. I was sort of on a path to maybe be a CPA and thought that wasn't for me. So I switched to technology, but within a year or two of technology, I ended up in the data world. And pretty much all my career can be summarized in that I've been in and around data from a standpoint of analytics, AI, machine learning, any way that I could help companies either reduce expenses, increase revenue, meet regulations, which is a very interesting discussion in of itself around the decentralized world. So that's basically what I've been doing. During the pandemic, I actually, prior to that, I got some cryptocurrency out of curiosity. That's a side note. And I, not much had really happened. And then during the pandemic, it picked up and I started really seeing the opportunity that the technology of blockchain and smart contracts under cryptocurrency gave, and how little knowledge most people have in the US, at least among my colleagues, between a cryptocurrency and what tokenization is with a blockchain and smart contract. So part of it was that got me involved was the cryptocurrency aspect, but the other was the underlying technology and architecture, and how could I use my experience in finance, in data, and start to look at mapping traditional into a decentralized world. And then Carlos, you'd mentioned DAO. As we go along, the regulations still aren't clear in the US on how cryptocurrencies are going to be dealt with. However, we had Wyoming that as of July 1 allows a DAO, which is basically setting on top of an LLC, it appears, a limited liability corporation, which interestingly enough, Wyoming, not a big state from population and not well known for a lot of things, but Wyoming actually created the LLC, or was the first in the US to have an LLC.
I see it.
Very progressive. Yes, very progressive. So that's my background. If there's data and some complexity and some interesting things, I'm always interested to be around and find other smart people and learn other things.
I mean, I hope you find other smart people. you might not find them here. I hope so. I hope to be up to the challenge. And since most of our listeners are American, I guess they're familiar with what an LLC is and what it entails. But for the international crowd, would you mind just quickly mentioning that?
So an LLC is an entity, a legal entity similar to a corporation, any company, but it has some benefits. The LLC has less paperwork they have to do in bureaucracy. Also, it has a limitation in number of members. Obviously, when you start looking at a DAO, the number of members limitation is an issue because DAOs can have thousands and millions of potential, folks that are involved in the DAO. So that was one of the things they had to cover. The other thing is obviously a US court or regulator wants to know who in a company we go to if something goes wrong, right? That's usually the CEO at the top or a board. Well, obviously, that's a challenge for a DAO because a DAO is structured in such a way that there may not be, as they call it, one throat to choke. So Wyoming has taken that step of moving to where the liability can be handled within an entity in the US. The legal, I should have disclosed, Carlos, right off the standpoint, I am neither a financial advisor nor am I a lawyer. So I won't get much deeper into the legal, but I think it's exciting that the US is taking those first steps and looking at how organizations can continue, to move forward. As I mentioned, LLC was started in Wyoming as well. They've proven to be very progressive. LLCs have been around, don't quote me, but it's not been over 20 years, probably 10, 15 years, something like that. So relatively new. And then if you go through how entities have changed over time in the US and globally, there's been a change. And as it went along, it's been either easier to start a company or the liabilities have been changed. So I see the DAO as being the next construct with that, is being able to come up with the decentralized organizational and that more open structure that DAOs represent.
It's an interesting thing that you mentioned about Wyoming being this small state that pioneered the LLC, and now it's pioneering this DAO law, because it's sort of what's happening right now, that a couple of small states and then cities like Miami that are not traditionally in the tech scene, or that are not traditionally known for being tech cities, that are sort of picking up the ball where San Francisco or the Silicon Valley area left it. And they're taking a step forwards towards this, right? Like now they have the City Coin project that Miami is very interested on. Are there any other smaller areas of the US that are moving things forward also, in particular when it comes to blockchains?
So let me start with just saying I live near New York City in New Jersey, right across the river. And notably, I don't see a lot of that in New York and California, our two most populous states. Florida would be like one of the next most populous states. I would say the other area I see in connecting, so in the last year, one of the things during the pandemic is I've really been focusing on architecturally understanding decentralized blockchain and smart contracts, and looking to start mapping those to traditional, as well as looking at what innovations come out of it. And I'll talk about innovation in a bit. But Colorado has been another area I've had quite a few contacts that seem to be in this space as well. In New York, as far as the city, Brooklyn has quite a few endeavors that I've seen going on in the space. But New York, in general, from a governmental standpoint, I have not seen a lot of activity on it. I think it's a matter of a place like Wyoming is looking for growth. They can more control what they're doing with their smaller population. And then quite often other states, either jump on or resist. I would expect that it may follow a path similar to marijuana legalization that's happened in the US. It's not federally legal. Different states have come on at different times. But interestingly enough, one of the early states was California. And I'm not really seeing that happen. And it could just be my smaller viewpoint happen in the decentralized space.
That was that was the joke that we were making with Ken Barton the other day, that well, why are all these blockchain companies moving to Colorado? Well, marijuana's legal here.
Oh, really?
And you can no, but seriously, we see this DAO law come into place in Wyoming of all places, and it seems like Wyoming is moving forward with a lot of blockchain initiatives, right? That their governor, I think, is pretty young, and they're coming up with a lot of these with a lot of ideas in the blockchain sphere. And also, like you mentioned, Florida in particular as a city, and as a state, and Miami as a city. Mayor Francis Suarez, he's a bit of a celebrity, and there's this concept of city or state CEOs, right? That is a bit of a libertarian idea, that these people should be pitching their territories, their states, their cities for companies to come in and trying to sell them. So is this something that's permeating into the tech culture of the States these days?
In the tech culture, I would say, my view of the tech culture specifically is they tend to be ahead of, where things are. I think in the US, for instance, if you did cryptocurrency holders by tech and non-tech, you would find a huge number of cryptocurrency holders are technical in some facet, right? They may not be a coder, but they're somewhere along new technology. So I would expect that these areas, Miami in general, has been looking to grow in tech space, et cetera. So the fact that they start, looking at cryptocurrency and different things, tokenization, NFTs, any of that is not surprising to me. Miami has been an area where they have been trying to get more business investment and develop.
The city coin project is also a very interesting one. I've been trying to get someone to come and talk here on the podcast about it, because it seems like there are ways where it could go right and there are ways where it could go wrong, right? You could see it dramatically impacting the lives of people. Do you think it can have, the DAO law in particular, can have a big impact in the life of Wyoming citizens?
Well, I think if you think about the bigger picture of the movement of decentralized, it being global, and one thing I've noticed with my network, right? My network in the past had been primarily data related. And since I started in New York, I actually have a LinkedIn group that has about 6,500 people in it. But since I started in New York and data, that was early on, most of my contacts. And as we've seen data move offshore, a lot of it became India, because a lot of the back office for banks is in India, specifically Mumbai, of one city. So my network, as I look at it, was primarily some UK, some US, India, maybe some Australia and a few other places, right? My group has people from all over the globe, the LinkedIn group. But when I started getting into connecting with folks in the decentralized space, it is amazing how global that became. So to answer your Wyoming question, I think that the opportunity exists with the whole culture and movement of decentralized and what it represents is that, one state in the US or one small country, say El Salvador, can make a huge difference potentially globally that they wouldn't have been able to do in traditional technologies and business models. So I don't know if that, I can't predict the future of what, holds for Wyoming, but I see it giving them a much larger reach globally to be able to do things. If someone wants to do something, from another part of the globe in the US, you would go where it's friendly. And Wyoming is basically saying, hey, we're friendly to DAOs. And, potentially that goes to other areas. I recently was communicating with someone that is looking at potentially mining operations, cryptocurrency mining operations in Wyoming. So, there's that had actually been done in New York State a few years back, and they had some challenges with it. So there's, obviously the challenge with the mining of the environmentalism and sustainability, et cetera. But again, those kind of things I look at as, is there a technical solution? If there's a technical solution and that can be reached, it'll take the barriers of that out of the way.
Limited liability companies like the ones that Wyoming is classifying DAOs as are very, like you said, are limited in the number of people that they can assemble, but they also have other limitations. One of the promises of this new regulation was that this was not going to be the end of it, right? Because in the end, there are certain categories in which DAOs cannot be 100% overlapped. 100% overlapped with the structure of an LLC. Do you think? What do you think can be done to make this regulation friendlier? Or what do you think the point of a regulation like this would even be, apart from, let's say, knowing who to penalize in case DAO incurs in illegal behavior?
Yeah, and again, the disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, but I will say from a business standpoint and entrepreneur standpoint, I look at
it. Neither am I, guys. If you're looking for legal advice,
yeah, we're not going to go there. But the answer I would give is from a limited liability corp, any corporation, really, the liability is handled through insurance. It's really not handled through the structure of the entity. So if you start looking at where things will go, and I don't know the deep detail. I remember reading about what Wyoming was doing from that standpoint, but actually setting one up, just to disclose, I haven't went through that process yet. I am actually working with a few companies where I'm looking to map blockchain to traditional. One is a risk product for finance. So we're basically looking at cryptocurrency, et cetera. Another is basically an ETF for crypto. So that company just formed a DAO as soon as they could. And I just saw the news, I forget who it was, but the first DAO was announced that was set up in Wyoming. So I think that so that's the liability. So to cover that, usually insurance does that. Secondly, we really won't know how this plays out until there's a challenge, right? That's where things really come up, when somebody comes back and says, hey, wait a minute, somebody's been wrong, this has happened, a court case or something like that. You won't know, and there's not really precedent in the US courts around a DAO. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. And I don't have the answers, Carlos, to what that's going to hold. But I do think that and I've said this to different folks doing things in the decentralized world, laws are laws. It really doesn't matter that you created a token for something, right? The technical part of that is, doable, et cetera. But when you're in the US, you have to abide by the laws in the US. Other countries would have different laws, right? So the decentralized and all the things I think are great about being global and being more open, it's all good, but it's still under the system of laws. So how those may change, I don't know. But I'm encouraged to see that at least the first step has been taken, that you can actually set up such an entity.
And also something that I would like to talk to people, or to say to people, sorry. English as a second language. Something that I would like to say to people when it comes to DAOs in the real world. You want to know that DAOs so far have been used like over-glorified voting structures in most cases. And I'm not going to say all of them are these, but like for the most part, this is what most people use them for. But the greatest power of DAOs comes with their ability to execute things on their own, right? Like a DAO can go and purchase things on chain. A DAO can do pretty much endless operations off chain, the same types of operations that you and I would be able to do with our wallets, right? Or with our tokens. And sort of like giving them as way of existing in the legal world or in a legal framework would allow them to do the same things off chain as well, or in the mid-space, real world, whatever you may call it. So a DAO that is legally constituted can now go hire a lawyer and can go and buy property and can now go and even register other companies, which is a pretty powerful concept now that you think about it, right?
Right.
So I'm going to send to the quick message from our sponsors that we do. This is a 30-second thing, guy. Don't leave the video. I know what you're thinking. Now here comes another ad. It's a quick thing. It's the only ad that we do. Go, take it as a chance to drink some water. Take it as a chance to leave us a comment about what your favorite application for a DAO would be. Take it as a chance to subscribe, and we'll be right back. The Blockchain People podcast is brought to you by Coin Payments, the world's first and leading crypto payment processor. Coin Payments serves over 70,000 merchants in over 200 nations with industry-low fees since 2013. The Coin Payments wallet lets users hold over 2,000 different cryptocurrencies, which is why they're used by giants such as NordVPN and Binance. Whether you're a merchant or an individual looking to get paid in crypto, Coin Payments could be just what you need. Alan, you were telling me off the record that you're working on a new exciting project. So would you like to tell us about it before we pick up with DAOs?
Certainly. And it's based on what my experience has been from a US perspective, in confusion between Bitcoin versus blockchain versus smart contract. It seems like there's a lot of misunderstandings of the technology supporting cryptocurrencies and other things that can be done with this technology. So I've started a decentralized innovation lab. It's basically through close network that I've started this. And to try it out, we've basically looked at taking a traditional finance risk and optimization solution and looking at cryptocurrencies and starting to give input there. Another company that has an ETF in the cryptocurrency, we've been advising. So looking at a decentralized innovation lab as, if you think a DAO construct, I see it as being instead of a zero sum business model where if you win, I lose, or I win, you lose. The whole decentralized view is it's more infinity sum, that we can both win, right? There's ways where everybody can benefit. And a lot of that you see with a lot of the DeFi solutions, especially, are addressing folks in areas where they've not been addressed or there's barriers for them. So from that standpoint, looking at the technology itself, just to get a little geeky, if you look at a blockchain and a smart contract, that is not much different than a database with what's called a trigger. My background is data. So quite often, databases are set up so that if you go and insert a record, it can trigger, i.e. smart contract, something else to happen, right? So that's existed. The challenge that exists in that traditional legacy database technology is, there's a few. One, you can be in a situation where you lock or you're circular. So that's a challenge. The other is the capabilities in that trigger is limited to what you can do, similar to what I'm seeing in a smart contract, right? And you may run out of your ability to do the business requirement you would like to do. And then the second is, and I'm not a Solidity coder, but I've talked to a few and I've looked at it. I've looked at code and I'm told it's not that complicated, but the complication comes in the business requirement. When you do something with a smart contract, that's what it is. It potentially becomes immutable. And then when you want to change things, you now have a big challenge, right, of how you do that. And that wasn't any different in traditional database with triggers. So I see those opportunities. A challenge is always also an opportunity, right? And I see us being in very early stages of the technology of where things can go, because from databases and triggers, we've went into robotic process automation with AI and machine learning. And I also see that in the decentralized land where folks are looking to add machine learning and AI to add more capability, performance, and other things to the decentralized environment.
I think, and there's this very interesting construct that most things in blockchain are frowned upon if they're not open source. And that in some way can kill off innovation, right? Because a lot of innovation comes from the private sector and it's funded by the private sector. So you effectively saw tokens back in the day as a way to sort of surpass this, as a way to create wealth around open source projects. But that's also an obscure concept from the player that comes from the traditional environment. So how do you see, how do you see this us transitioning to find a middle point between both of these models?
Yeah, and I firmly stay in both. So into the intellectual property, I'll speak about that in a bit, the traditional intellectual property. But I do see that the movement is very open source. And interestingly, if you look back, probably the biggest open source project ever back in the time, many people don't even know about anymore. And it was a PK-zip, which was a compression technology. If I remember correctly, was started open source. So it was very close to infrastructure and something that business didn't touch. And that's a difference with where we're going. When you start looking at DAOs and smart contracts, they're getting much closer to business. And as you get closer to that customer and you start looking at dApps and how that may interact, I expect that complexity is going to come as a challenge to determine how do we address it. So talk about intellectual property, the space, I see a lot of Creative Commons, obviously according to the open source, but I also started looking at traditional innovation and specifically invention such as intellectual property. And in my research, I found, because I'm always interested in, I live in the US, what other countries are doing what, and where are, quite often in any technology, there's certain areas that get ahead for whatever reason. It's quite often the people that are there, right? And that's always been true in technology. And this will likely just extend that. So I'm always interested that I don't over represent my US where I live as being a perspective, because it's not, right? This is a global opportunity. Given that, I was looking at actually just on Google, they have patents, global patents. And I was interestingly in research find that the top 5 companies have 67% of the patents for blockchain in 2021 are all Chinese-based firms. And they're who you would think they are. They're Tencent, Alipay. I don't have the other companies right on top of my head, but look at what's happening there. The Chinese government has had some challenges with these firms as well. So right. It's a very interesting dynamic that while cryptocurrency may be one thing, the blockchain innovation, et cetera, has been going, and that's just from a patent standpoint. The other thing I always like to point out with patents is people quite often have the misconception, if I get a patent, then that saves me. Well, if you really think of what a patent does, it actually exposes to the world what you invented. And then it does give you the right, to be able to, manage and sue or whatever you need to do to protect what you invented. But you need to be able to protect that. Whereas if you see a lot of startups, they just went to, we will build faster, we'll innovate faster. We're not worried about IP. And I see that as also being a trend in the decentralized world with some of the DeFi projects and some of the decentralized things I see going on, is they just look to innovate faster. Creative Commons, innovate faster, move forward. So don't know if that thoroughly answers your question, Carlos. Part of that is my opinion of what I'm saying, but the facts are that, from a patent standpoint, these Chinese firms have, gotten a lot of those. And I was also looking at dApps recently, and what was interesting there was it wasn't firms. There were 2 Chinese universities, which in the AI and machine learning space is also true, that the universities in China have done a lot on, focusing on and putting efforts toward developing machine learning AI. So I sort of see this as all things around data and things that can make data more transparent, more usable, and moving forward with the fact that, data is underlying all these capabilities.
Did you manage to see what were these patents? Did you manage to, or is it only Chinese?
What was the question again, Carlos, about them?
What is it that these companies like Alipay are registering as intellectual property? What are they developing over there?
So I remember seeing some, as you would expect, some supply chain.
Right.
I saw things around financial, which you would expect, especially with, Tencent and Alipay. Alipay, and to give some frame of reference, is Tencent had like double what Alipay had. And then the next one after Alipay was Ant blockchain, which I didn't thoroughly research those, Carlos, what Ant blockchain is into, but they seem to be the one most precisely in this area. And the next one was Ping An, P-E-N or P-I-N-G-A-N. And then finally was Beijing hologram. So I haven't researched all those to see exactly what those patents are for. But, I find it interesting that, while there may be certain constraints or, actions against potential cryptocurrency, the technology itself is marching forward.
And this would pretty much fall in line with the idea that China is this land in where things are stuck in the traditional ways, sometimes only innovating when it's convenient for the governments, right? I mean, I think I was very interested when I when I found out about your research about the fact that there are so many patents coming from China in the blockchain scene. And I'm even more curious to see, do you think those would be playing out into the general blockchain scene eventually? Do you think they have a potential to become sort of like a world superpower like they have become with other things in this regard?
Yeah, and I can't say I understand the culture that deeply, but I do think there's always a danger and a misconception of looking at it as an outsider. Clearly there's innovation going on. Clearly there's well-educated, smart people that are thinking, what can we do with our education and our capabilities? So I think that the next level, if you look at the decentralized culture where it's very open source, it is going to be, I'll just say, interesting if you look back at historical approach that, and this is other governments beyond China, versus the potential where the community has more at stake with, basically in a DAO situation to be able to govern, to be able to vote, to be able to make their own, future. It's transitional, I think from all governmental standpoints. So I don't know the culture inside well enough. I just see the observation that if I think that the US has the most, I am incorrect. The research points out that it's not the US that's doing the most in the space, nor is it, other, countries that have been early stage. Canada, for instance, has done a lot in this space as well. I think part of it is a population, because there are, just as in AI and machine learning, there's areas in Canada that are very advanced in what they're doing. And that's true when you go around the globe with certain areas. India is another a country that has done a lot with AI and machine learning, especially of late. Not that they haven't for years, but you can see that there's a movement. And I think that one of the options that exists, Carlos, is just as in the finance market, the fear of missing out happens in this area. And companies start looking to say, okay, what do we need to do to, not fall behind? If you look at where one of the architectural mappings I've done is an enterprise architecture to a decentralized. So if you look at it, a DApp is a front end, right? The blockchain and smart contract is the database, et cetera. Process is interesting. Process is a bit of a challenge because, some of it can be in the DApp side, some of it can be in the smart contract side. But if you look at how architecture goes, we went from databases being in a big room somewhere to being in the cloud to now them being actionable in the cloud, right? And decentralized is similar, where a smart contract can make some, change that, wherever you're sitting right now, it's near you, but it doesn't matter because it's decentralized, right? So the interesting dynamic to me is being an entrepreneur, especially, is the business opportunities aligned or that will happen along with the technology advancement. And I was putting together a deck for someone about where are we in the life cycle of this area, blockchain, smart contract, decentralized. We're really early, I believe. The technology, if you look at traditional, how they've done robotic process automation, they've added AI and machine learning to things like recommender engines. We're nowhere near any of that yet, but that is innovation. And since it's been done before in a different realm, it's easier to do again in a decentralized world. So I think that these, how the changes happen are going to come even more rapid than they have in the past.
I think people tend to judge the growth of the blockchain industry in regards to Bitcoin's price, right? Which is a huge mistake. You would say, okay, it went you would see people saying it went from 0 to 66,000. So we for sure must be at like the highest high we'll ever reach as an industry. This is as far as we go. And I mean, that's a huge misconception. Well, when we were talking about intellectual property, I remembered Did you ever have a chance to look at Uniswap's approach to their intellectual property with V3?
I did not. I haven't looked at that, Carlos.
It's an interesting thing because they sort of registered, I mean, V2 and V1, they were open source. Anyone could fork the code, and a lot of people did. I'm looking at you, SushiSwap. And we see that now with V3, they are trying to do something different. Like basically they have it, I'm no expert in intellectual property at all, but they have it under some regime of intellectual property. And the fun thing or the interesting bit is to see how this will all play out, because how do you enforce that when you're dealing with blockchains, right? Like some say you would not even be possible. You would not even be able to do that. Do you have any thoughts about intellectual property, and in particular about, I know you have thoughts about intellectual property, about NFTs when it comes to intellectual property?
Well, that is a great segue, because I was just talking to an artist, I know 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they said, this is horrible. Anybody could steal my art and put it, on an NFT and resell it. And my answer to them, again, I'm not a lawyer, but my answer to them is, hey, you own the rights to your art. And the laws didn't change. You still own the rights to your art. So you would deal with it the same way as if I took a picture of his painting and started selling it everywhere, right? He would come after me, cease and desist. You can't be selling my art everywhere. So I said, the NFT technology itself has no issue with that intellectual property. The author still owns it. The irony to me that happens there is, I remember a time when all the copy machines, and if you go try to make a copy, now at Staples, et cetera, they basically ask you, and my mother was an artist, so I took a picture of a piece of art she had one time. They ask you, do you have the right to take a picture of this?
Really? Do they do that?
Yes, they literally
that
do
wouldn't happen. That wouldn't happen in Argentina.
Yeah. So with NFTs, I mean, similarly, I think we barely touched the surface on what you can do with the NFT. Interesting to see how sports teams have gotten involved. Tangentially, the NCAA has now said, hey, these college students should be able to, make some money and work off what they do and not have everybody else make a profit off their back. So it's going to be interesting to see, as these things come together. Laws are changing, having nothing to do with NFTs, having nothing to do with decentralized, but fairness of, who actually is creating the value, and how does that value, how do they get rewarded for it? But NFTs, I think we've really barely scratched the surface on what can be done with saying, I have a digital ID in the cloud, for lack of a better word, but it's decentralized, it's there somewhere. I own it. And if you start looking at collectibles and those kind of things where, you have Pokemon cards, any type of collectible you have, you don't have a unique thing. In the, decentralized world, you have that unique key. So what is it you're putting with that? And, that gets to be a very large number of use cases. I'm actually just getting ready to go on a trip into sets with some folks. And one of the discussions that will be is what in their business is, I don't know if you can make a verb or adverb or whatever, NFTable, right, in what they do. But basically lay out what they're doing, what's blockchain that would help, what is smart contract that might help, is there a DApp opportunity, is NFT have any play there? And they're the experts about what their business does. So out of it comes hey, here's what could be done. And then it's a matter of prioritizing and see which is the one or two or three that they, or 50, because that's probably what happens, that they want to do. And then you got to rein them back to say, hey, these are the things that are most developed. But the NFT area, it's, I think, similar to cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency, the fact that it went way up and went down, I think we'll see some negativity in the next few months that'll bring the regulators even more. We're going to hear, some kid lost his parents' mortgage, and, there's going to be bad stories when you can 10 times or more triple lever, something, and it goes down. there will be stories. And then quite often that brings attention that somebody says, I have to do something. So NFTs, with what's happened with the auctions, et cetera, and the fact that, it probably won't sustain at that rate, but it did make people aware of the capabilities.
It's a bit of a shame that NFTs got a bigger rap, or they had this big boom with something as you would say not so legit, like this NFT art thing, right? Because what we witnessed is this whole explosion in value and in interest in the art, sort of like a mania in the middle of the inflation crisis and in the middle of the Bitcoin and crypto market going up and invariably going down after going up so fast and so high. And you see that a lot of people got interested in NFTs because, of course, whenever there's like a money bell ringing, everyone wants to run behind it. But like at the same time, you can see the interest dying off, right? And that made a lot of people aware of the possibility that NFTs could bring innovation to your business or to your life or to your open source, whatever you're developing, but also to get a lot of people interested in it for the wrong reasons. Do you think we'll see a period where people are still interested in this for the wrong reasons, and it'll be a long time until we catch up onto use cases for NFTs that are here to stay? Or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would expect with anything, there's going to be somebody that looks and says, how do I exploit this? I look at technology as always, a challenge. And, I look at it as fire, right? Wow, fire can do some great things. But fire can also do some damaging things. It's the use of it and how you use it that is that determiner. So NFTs similarly, I think that the opportunity that happens is you get a lot of recognition, some of it bad, but there's someone somewhere thinking, wait, I could do this with that. And I expect there'll be innovations that come out of it that we can't anticipate, in the future. And that could be good and bad, right? I'm not saying that they're one way or the other. So I'm big on innovation. I actually do work with high school and college and discuss difference between invention and innovation. A brief example that I'll give that I read recently is the creators of Uber. The way that started, I don't know if you heard, Carlos, have you ever read, they were at a conference in Europe and it was raining like crazy and they were trying to find a cab and couldn't find a cab. And they had smartphones in their hand and they're like, why can't we just use our phone to call the car to come to us? And that's how, at least what I read, Uber got started. Now that isn't possible without the invention of smartphones. And that's not possible without the network and the capability of, the apps and et cetera that exist. So similarly, when we start looking at NFTs and other technologies in this space, I expect that the part of it will be hype, but somebody somewhere is coming up with a good, innovation that we didn't think of. And we'll later say, Carlos, when we talked, we should have thought of that. That makes perfect sense. Why didn't we think of that? Yeah.
That's my mom when I told her Bitcoin went up. We should have thought about that. I told you. Christmas 2015, I remember. Okay, yeah. Man. So we can, if we go back to DAOs for a minute, because we got pretty far away from it, and there was a bit that I wanted to cover. There's an article that we just put out on the, and I say we just because it's not done, but it will be in the future, and we're 2 weeks in the future. About DAOs on our website, and you can find it at dcore.net. We're putting more and more articles, so I would really encourage you guys to look at it. And these are some like use cases for DAOs. So would you mind just if we could do a little dynamic or read one of those potential use cases? We talk about it for a second.
Great, sure.
Okay, so number one, pooling resources to buy and sell expensive NFT art pieces for a profit. So this is like what they call art cartels, right? And that's effectively possible in the DAO world. And in everything here can happen on chain, which is pretty attractive. What are the downsides here?
What are the downsides of that? So obviously, if you're going after a scarce resource, some kind of art, it was NFT art you're looking at, Carlos? Was that the constraint?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's clearly constrained because an NFT is one individual. So as with anything where there's a scarcity, obviously the value, and this has been a big discussion in finance. They're just been really trying to figure out what's fundamental value, right? What's book value? Like, and that has nothing to do with this discussion we've been having. It has to do everything with retail traders, right? With the whole GameStop phenomenon, et cetera, if you're familiar with that. But the dynamic of the community coming together will potentially create, you know, a bubble around something that lasts for a brief period of time. And then people say, well, what else am I going to do with that? And they move on to the next shiny toy. So I guess that would probably be the first thing I would think of is it as I call it, a shiny toy situation where, yeah, it goes great up. And then if it does, what gets lost, right? If they're using,
that's something that, because people tend to equate Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies to tulips, right? To the tulip fever or whatever. But like, we can see that we're way past that. Like, you see bubbles coming and going, but there is value somewhere there that happens to stay and that is in a constant uptrend. What Nick Carter was pointing out on Lex Fridman's podcast, I was listening to it a while ago, is that the actual tulip mania could be more equated to the NFT mania, where pictures just started selling for a ridiculous price. And right. I'm very interested. Do you know of anyone being able to resell those pictures? Because I know they bought them for millions of dollars, but have those things actually gone up in price? Is there an actual market for that?
So I've looked at the markets, but I haven't really looked at resale and what happens after. You know, I look just to see, out of curiosity, you know, what is the trend and what could you get? I mean, my start in cryptocurrency, literally, Carlos, was $50 every 2 weeks. That's how I started buying. So there was no great, I'm going to spend $100,000 doing this. I just got in out of curiosity and $50 every 2 weeks. I think we are in a world now where there's so much advancement that you need to sort of have a shotgun approach. And I actually use it to learn. I believe if you put $1 in something, you pay more attention to what happens with it. So I was looking at NFTs just to see what is the opportunity. Not that I'm going to, you know, take my retirement and put it in NFTs and the expectation it's going to grow, but looking at, I don't know the long term. Nobody can know the long term approach of what's going to happen with it. But we're at a point where it's the early stages of starting. So it's going to be interesting. Actually, the company I'm working with around risk and optimization, that's one of the things we're looking at is if you took your, you know, your entire savings or retirement or whatever, and you start saying, okay, what do I do in traditional? What should I have in stocks, bonds, et cetera? What should I do in real estate? I saw a hedge fund, don't quote me on a hedge fund, financial advisor. He basically said he didn't tell his clientele that they shouldn't at least do 1% in cryptocurrency. He would be doing a disservice because you should be diversifying. And if this asset goes forward, he's not diversified his clientele. He's not allowed them to diversify. So NFTs, I mean, collectibles have been long time situation where, you know, people that have extreme wealth, you know, buy cars, buy wine collections, buy any number of collectibles. So this may go that way. And if it's something that, you know, one athlete, super rich athlete, sees another one have it and he wants it, who's to say what that value is?
Some would even say that the actual flippening, you know, they see the flippening will be when Ethereum prices surpasses Bitcoin, but they call the personal flippening the fact that most people that started in crypto, like you, that they didn't ape in like some of us, where we just put like a whole of our life savings into it, but some people that are smarter about it suddenly find themselves with most of their net worth in crypto just because of the price spike. And that's what they will call like the personal flippening. And you're right about having point number two. You're right about having some skin in the game. There's this famous story about these Google engineers that would just give each other $1 if they didn't work out that day. And I mean, these people are earning what, 6-7 figures a year, but like the fact that there was a little bit of skin in the game made a huge difference for them in their workout schedules. So I would really encourage people to take that advice and go and put a little bit into it just so they can start having it in the back of their minds. So, okay, DAO use case number two. And this relates to something, well, to a lot of what we were talking about and to something that we were talking about with a previous guest, Kevin Owocki from Gitcoin. Fund blockchain public goods, that is open source projects that are used for everyone, that are necessary but do not have a business model behind them, with both issues as donations and donation matched by a pool. So this is pretty much Gitcoin. Do you see any potential for open source projects to eventually take over everything that is created by the private initiative when it comes to blockchain?
Take everything over.
I mean, so eventually, not like
yeah. So that's really hard, to predict. So an example that from the first case though that I was thinking of as we were talking, it is really so hard to predict what a mega trend is going to be 5 years from now or 10. Right? Further you go, the hazier it gets. Right? You can see a few months out potentially. Especially if you have good sources. But the further you go, you can't imagine what an innovation is going to happen that changes things for us. So, I mean, if you look at the growth of open source and my background in working in data environments with large financial firms in New York, hedge funds, asset managers, et cetera, if I 10 years ago said, why don't we move data to the cloud? My contract would have ended that day. They would have booted me out of the office. I would be crazy talk. And now firm after firm has their data in the cloud, right? And it was always, there's a big security concern. And yet I used to just be amused because the cleaning crew would open up the data center and walk into the data center. I'm like, why do we think that cleaning crew couldn't have like some MIT spy working as part of the cleaning crew, right? And I always just thought the security thing was hilarious because they thought it was secure because it was on-prem. But quite often, many of your breaches are employees, disgruntled employees, right? So looking at open source, the sheer nature of how open source has moved forward, it takes care of certain things. It helps modify speed of being able to get a lot of things done quickly. There is review mechanisms in there, so you can see peer code, right? If you code something and I go look at Carlos's code, right? I can comment, I can say, hey, wait a minute, I don't know what Carlos is doing here with this code. So that openness and transparency is definitely a positive. As far as the DAO, actually being an open source, I really think they're really close in what their whole community goals are with how inputs are given in. I mean, one of the challenges that I think, exists is managing the governance and voting from a timeliness standpoint, but in some other ways. And they're very simple. The way may be, I don't know, do you like boating or like what kind of outdoor sport do you like, Carlos?
I'm a soccer type.
You're a soccer type. I don't like soccer. I want to be hiking. I'm just kidding. But if you think about it, that's what happens in a DAO is we split. And I want to be outdoors hiking and you want to be going all over the world, going to these soccer events. And that's where you want the DAO to go. So those things exist. That's not anything unique to a DAO. But I think the open source means what can you do? You can fork. You could have your soccer group and they could go off their way. And, and it's easier now than it would be if we set up a corporation and then we decided later, hey, you want to go soccer direction and I want to go another direction. Then it becomes how do you manage that, divvy it up, et cetera. So I think in general, taking everything over, no, I think, my view is things are never as great as we dream. That's my pessimistic side, but they're never as bad as we fear. So somewhere in the middle, things move forward and they may take detours and become unbalanced like a bicycle, but they move along in some general path.
Right. And I mean, I want to keep exploring the ideas in the about potential use cases for DAOs, but I'm also very curious, because you've mentioned this a couple of times, about your work in artificial intelligence and machine learning, as well as in the relationship that you find that blockchains and cryptocurrencies and decentralized structures can take along with these technologies, because somehow it seems like they haven't completely touched each other, right?
Yes, I do see some involvement now starting, and it seems like it's for one area I saw is mostly around performance, right? The high gas fees and the slow performance of using AI and machine learning to speed that process up. But I expect other areas, when you think about it, the use cases around AI and machine learning are sort of the process area that decentralized doesn't have, right? They have the storage, they have the triggers to do things, they have the dApps for front end, but in the middle, that process area needs some help. And I see that the AI machine learning can help. That being said, again, there is an overstatement of, and definitely some hype around what AI is going to do. I look back at Gary Kasparov, the chess player, as one of the first early folks that showed us what our world will be like with AI machine learning, right? When they started playing against AI or machine learning, it handily beat him in chess, because he'll never be able to beat a machine in grunt mathematics, right? That's what that machine does.
And especially in something with such a short, I want to say short, but with sort of such a defined set of rules.
Yes. And so it's easily done with, and that is primarily in the space of, machine learning and computing, is to do that math. So what he did was he started working with the machine, and they actually started a new set of competitions where it's him as a human with machine or multiple machines, right? And then they play each other. So he learned how to adapt, and he found that as a human, he has certain advantages. This has been proven true also in medical. They found that, doctors can be aided by, deep learning to find certain cancers, et cetera. But the machine, deep learning, doesn't do better than doctors by itself. And the doctor doesn't beat deep learning by itself. So combined, they become greater. And I see really the same thing coming together in this area with, decentralized technologies, is they'll continue to advance, aided along by, AI and machine learning. Of course, the meme is, right, that AI is a PowerPoint, machine learning is code. So given what's real and you can actually use today.
AI is sorry, I got distracted by the metaphor. AI is a PowerPoint. Okay, I get it now. Yes. I get it now. Yeah, that's what they call that's what they call Tesla's spreadsheet with wheels, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
So I see them coming together the more we go along, and again, my world is business meets data, and in the middle, what's there. And the other thing I will make a point is, humans just aren't logical. As much as we may say that we work on logic, humans do not work on logic, right? And it's been, study after study have proven that things happen with humans where it's not the logical thing. So there's a lot of crowd dynamics, which goes to the earlier discussion that we had. And that will be a part of this whole experience that we're going to go through as well.
There are also even Nobel Prize scientists that would argue that our brains are designed to not operate through logic, right? Just operate through sheer instinct and emotion. And in some way, like these blockchain or these on-chain solutions are presenting a possibility to put as much data in the world as possible, right? Because not only is it transparent, but it's immutable and it's trustless. So things like, going back to DAOs, like they can help you track the set of rules that help you achieve a certain performance, and you can extrapolate a lot into that. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yes, I would agree. And now we have an interesting, you just brought up another dynamic, that since you can store large amounts of data forever, any large firm has a record retention that says get rid of things after a certain period of time, right? When they legally don't have to have it. Well, that's an interesting dynamic with what's going to happen, where it'll last forever as long as, it's accessible, it's there. I look back to, and there may be a connection, I'm not sure, but there's a site called archive.org. Are you familiar with that? It archived all the websites way back.
Yeah. You go and see how Google looked like back in the 98. Yeah. That's as far as my usage of that goes.
And it goes way back. And it doesn't keep things forever. So I will say, by practical experience, I with a partner started a bookstore in 1994. I beat Amazon by a year, I will say. Really? So we started a bookstore. We were the 14th bookstore and the first around computer books on the web. And the web looked very different than it was today. If I got an email from somebody back then, you trusted them. If they said, send me $100, you sent them $100, because anybody you met online, you trusted. It's amazing how things have changed over time.
Was it like, I would imagine that before, you know better than me, definitely, but like, I would think that back in the day, you would trust someone online even less than now.
No, you could definitely trust almost, people were sending cash in the mail for books, for tech books. They just trusted they'd get the book. We actually had a check once from China, and I had no idea if we could ship to China. So I had to search around. Then the next day, our website said domestic US only, right? That was our first, what do we do to change this? Well, we're only selling US. But we found out that the check, it wasn't certified, so they hadn't put the money out. I found a friend to be able to translate Chinese and write them an email back in Chinese. And we went back then and found a company in the UK that would send them the book. Because the other thing that happened back then is, if somebody came and you couldn't do it, you would typically find somebody that you could refer them to, right? It wasn't like you just ignored them. But if you were a business and somebody came to you and said, and our business was books, I need a book. We said, I don't know how to get that book. Carlos, do you know? How can we find somebody? But yeah, it was a very different world, which, I think that translates very similarly to where we are in decentralized. Some of the exploitations we've seen are, they could be perceived as being, and they are negative to some. Actually, it's one of my favorite stories about Dogecoin and how people say they don't get it. It's just a meme. And my point is, humans aren't logical. And Dogecoin had a culture that when people lost their Dogecoin, when they got scammed, they made it back up to them. Well, that's an interesting culture, right? Regardless of the coin, the fact that you can be in a trusted community and that community will do things positive, that to me is why Dogecoin has, it's gotten some of where it has gotten to.
Man, I didn't remember that, but you're absolutely right. For all of you that came to this community with the latest bull market, back in the day, the Dogecoin community was just amazing. You're right about that.
And no prediction of what happens tomorrow, right? But that's basically where it, and then they also supported the Jamaican bobsled team to go to the Olympics, right? So there's that part that's not book value, right? It's community, it's people doing good things. So back to, I'm circulating back to your point of DAOs. If that culture can be kept through, and how will it impact open source and many other organizations? Huge impacts. Again, it comes back to using that technology for good and not for ill.
And what can data scientists and data people such as yourself do in order to enable, to take all of this huge amount of data and enable the open source community? We can, I can imagine how it can help the private initiative, but how would you balance that for the public sector? I'm no public sector, sorry. Like that's just translating from Spanish. Like the open source sector.
Well, the first off, I would say in the machine learning area, the first thing you need is data. The more you have of data, the more you can do. The algorithms are secondary to data. If you don't have solid, good data, it doesn't matter how fancy your algorithm is, it's not going to lead you where you think you're going to go. So that data, as it grows, starting with being decentralized, so I don't have to go to one source and either for performance or cost, bog down getting that data, is one enabler I see for machine learning. The data's there. You can go get to it. And then the next part starts, Carlos, is what is the use case? What do I want to do? Do I want to increase revenues? And when I say revenues, that's sort of my traditional hat. But in the open source decentralized world, it's, revenue is growth from a community standpoint. What are you trying to do? Recommender systems of being able to say, looking at use cases for DAO. If you have voting, I could see it like anything where you have certain classes of voting for different things, right? You may be voting on, hey, what sport are we about? That's one group. Another group could be voting on, what new technology should be put into the DAO. I had somebody interestingly recently from traditional finance says, hey, why couldn't Microsoft just spin a coin out? That's an interesting question. Why couldn't they? Right? And we actually have, for instance, examples now where it's becoming commingled. Binance, I believe it is, has Tesla that you can trade along with crypto.
Right.
So this is very interesting where it's going to go with brokers where, Robinhood for a while has had cryptocurrencies you could get along with traditional. And by the way, you can day trade them with no, in the US, there's a rule called PDT, pattern day trader, that you under 25 grand, there's rules, et cetera, and you can only do so much. Cryptocurrency doesn't have any of that. The other point I've made to traditional finance people is it's real time. When I trade, Bitcoin or one of those, it's real time settling. Whereas in the financial marketplace, I have to wait 2 days. And then I have a certain window when I can trade, and my money is out of my control at like 8 p.m. at night. I can't do anything with it. Whereas in crypto, you can do whatever you want at any time. So I think already these things, these technologies are going to exert pressure on traditional to say, catch up, right? These, whether it was regulation or technology, you're behind the game, catch up. And I expect as we go into, more capabilities with DAOs from a business organizational standpoint and a community, the same kind of pressure is going to happen. That there's going to be that, necessary tension between here's what the technology can do, here's what the community wants to do, and here's what we can do within a DAO. So I think it's going to be very exciting to see what business models may change.
You could even, because countries like, what's the name of this country that would make every decision based on their happiness score? Was it?
I don't remember, but
I don't remember.
It sounds like it's like Finland or one of those areas.
No. It was like an Eastern Asian.
Oh, really?
The type of country, like super small, of course, but they would make all of their decisions based on their happiness score. And you could even try and use these kind of tools like DAOs and machine learning and whatever to try and make the DAO sort of like automatically maximize the happiness of their users. That would be, I mean, that's an area where I'm very interested to see how it plays out, because nowadays you have endless possibility for experiments at a macroeconomic level and at a governance level, right? Like you've never seen this much data play out, this much data being put out and being sort of over there for grabs, right?
Yeah, I would agree. And and the challenge that exists, which is a very human challenge, right? You want to go to soccer and I want to go hiking. So that happiness score is going to be interesting to see, does it drive dynamics, right? From a standpoint of certain people migrate to areas and that have certain kind of DAOs. So it'll be interesting to see for sure.
And we've been using this metaphor of soccer and of hiking, yeah, and we've been treating them as different things, right? As hard forks, effectively. But you could even argue that if you would put them in a different example, in a quadratic model where everything you do for one team at least tangentially benefits the other, so that, that not everything is a zero-sum game, but everything is positive sum, you would even see a lot of, again, macroeconomic variables play out in this example. And going back to the DAO use cases and how machine learning could impact them, another one, let's take a final one of the example list and run it through this data learning sort of mindset. Let's try and take data learning and apply to this. This is going to be a fun one because we talked about it. We talked about like DAOs becoming legal structures that operate in the mid space. And what if a DAO wants to go shopping for real estate? I mean, or for land, for open a farm, whatever a DAO chooses to do. You would see that there is also a lot of on-chain data that can be used to inform everyone that would want to buy land, to inform anyone that would want to buy real estate, anyone that would want to open farms, both in the public and the private sector. Do you think there are other off-chain real-world applications where the data from DAOs could be useful?
Yeah, I think there's many. I don't think we've scratched the surface of use cases and what can be done.
Just to give you a little bit more time to think in there, I know that I sometimes ask people to predict the future in here and then to throw them a big question and sit back and wait for their answer. So no pressure.
No, and that's the right you have as a host, Carlos. That's that power that you can exert.
That's the only power I get.
Yeah, in a friendly way. So similar to infinity sum. So my point of earlier discussion, just to clarify, is the either or zero sum of soccer versus is a very human view of things, right? It's one of the things where we as humans aren't always logical of, I don't need to be first in the line. Right? There's going to be lots of product for me to be 50th in the line, right? But you tend to always want to be the first, et cetera. So just to be clear, I think it does take us more to an infinity sum, but looking at the, business cases for DAOs from a standpoint of what do they get us? An organization structure, a governance structure. With that comes voting capabilities, right? Potential crowdfunding. One of the areas I've been involved with is crowdfunding. And one of the things I think may happen with regulation in the US, because I expect somebody will lose lots of money in cryptocurrency and they'll say that can't happen. We have to save them.
Hi, Mark Cuban.
Going to crowdfunding. Crowdfunding, you can basically, if you're what's called a non-accredited, which is how much money you make or how many liquid assets you have. If you're beneath that certain amount, you can buy, I think, $2,400 worth of startup, investment per year. I would expect I see the same thing happening potentially with cryptocurrency. They just put a cap on, they don't get rid of it all. They just say, hey, look, you can't take $2,500 and margin it 10 times. So you got 25,000, borrow that from your parents and lose the mortgage money, right? So I would expect that's the kind of thing that goes forward. But looking at the DAO and the community aspect of it, humans are humans. And what will be exploited is going to be, one of the things that's of interest with this new construct. On the other side, we have seen what they call it lowercase democratization of all kinds of things, of investing, right? That it's no longer just institutions. So this exists aside and apart from decentralized technologies, DAOs, but it certainly is going in the same down the river So now, not hiking now, I'm canoeing, Carlos, I've changed. But, it's going in the same direction down the river if you think of it that way. And the use cases, I believe we can't imagine in 5 years. If you go back 10 years ago, eBay's not eBay, but Uber, not existent. We couldn't have imagined it 10 years ago or so, right? So we see these things as they change. Who would have thought Amazon would be where all our, storage would be in the cloud, right? Amazon is a storage company, not even conceivable. So if we look ahead, I cannot predict, as we've said, the future, but you can predict that you can see opportunity for lots of innovation.
We were talking about intrinsic value way before.
Yes.
I've been reading this book, Debt, by David Graeber, rest in peace. And he was an anthropologist, and he tried to pick up the whole question, where does money come from, and actually try to contrast it to the real world history of where money comes from. And he just goes on and make like these amazing discoveries of how money is essentially born with debt, and that debt is such a concept that's so intrinsically human about the human experience, about how we're often building relationships that are based in debts that we have to each other. And when I'm reading it, I'm just going like, man, this must have been a lot of work. Like we've been like through 300 pages and we're still like in ancient Africa, and all the things that he must have seen and have to read it just to get to conclusions that are affirmative about what happened in the past. And what I also find very cool about DAOs is that now all of this is going to be in code. It's going to be basically code, like all of our decisions, all of our votes, all of our opinions and fights and everything. If it's on the blockchain, it's going to be there, like we said, forever. That's a huge, beautiful way to put it. Like, this is our history that's now being recorded on chain. And I think that's a great point to finish this conversation. And Alan, we've gone way over time. I mean, like the sun is coming through that window. That's always an indication that I should have cut like half an hour ago. Okay. Where can people learn more about you, about your work? What would you recommend to those listening to this that would like to get in touch?
So my company, which isn't updated with the stealth work I'm doing now, but it's C3alliance.com. C as in Charlie, the number 3.
Links are going to be in the description for everyone.
Okay. And, I'm on LinkedIn as well. I still use the old traditional ways of networking. So love to, as I grow the Innovation Lab, I'm looking to add like-minded folks to come. There is a cost. The cost is, as a community member, you need to participate and help out. So you take and you give, and it's, sort of in mind of where I see this whole decentralized DAO world can go in an idealistic standpoint. And remember, it's up to us to keep those technologies and use them for good and for helping society move along.
If you want to join the LinkedIn community, you mentioned there's a group as well, right?
So yeah, it's a data community. Thank you, Carlos. I have on my list to set up my decentralized innovation lab community. So I will be setting that up. It is not yet public and set up yet.
I'll be in there whenever you launch it.
Thank you, Carlos. It's been great. And I enjoy your podcast. I've seen others and more likely heard others. So appreciate it.
Well, that's great. If anyone wants to join the community on LinkedIn, I'll be there as well. I like to find I always like to hear back from people listening to the podcast as well. Like we have the luck that we're not a wide audience right now, but we're a very deep audience in the way that there's always meaningful discussions going around. So yeah, if you want to hit me up as well, always feel free to. We'll be on Alan's community on LinkedIn.
And you've given me a 2-week challenge. Now that I know I've got 2 weeks, I got to get it going.
Now you've got a deadline. Okay.
Thank you for that. Yes.
And thanks to everyone listening. This has been great. Bye-bye.